Now we're attacking a huge topic, namely what is existence. So we'll talk about what is existence in general, what do all existing things have in common. But we'll also talk about different types of existence, because if we say that there are mammoths, horses, unicorns, numbers, ideas, relationships, wholes and shadows, that these all exist, they don't seem to exist in the same way. But what are the differences between them? How should we categorize these different types of existence? So I'll start by looking at types of existence first, and then we'll move on to the topic of what they have in common, what existence is in general. Talking about the main types of existence then, we can start by saying that, well, absolutely everything we can think of as existing is either a possible or an actualized, it should be, not actualized structure in the physical field or in the qualia field. We've been talking most about the physical field, not so much about the qualia field, which is consciousness, but we'll say a lot about it later. So physical things, like a horse, is actualized in the physical field, and we can call that existence in the physical world, whereas imagined things, like a unicorn, are actualized in the qualia field when someone thinks about it, and that's existence in consciousness. So this is a main division then on things that exist in a more narrow sense. You can have a very broad sense of existence, and then any possible pattern that can be actualized either in the physical field or the qualia field could be said to exist. So if someone wants to insist that, for instance, a dodecahedron, if that's how you say it in English, that's 12 pentagons put together in one figure, someone would like to say, well, those existed even before any of them were actualized in the physical world or before anyone had thought of it. If you want to say that dodecahedron has a dodecahedron or the number 4 or anything has always existed before anyone thought of it or before it was actualized, well, then it's in this sense of existence as a possible pattern. But I'm going to use the term in a more narrow sense of existence. If we then look at existence in the physical world, then we can ask whether the parts of that, what the thing we're talking about, does it have parts that are actualized values or not? So, for instance, the difference between my brother or brotherhood. My brother has actualized parts at the same time and place as where my brother is. There are some parts of my brother that are actualized. But we can distinguish this from just a general pattern. Brotherhood in general is something that we can distinguish and register without saying that now there's a piece of brotherhood. So there are a lot of patterns that we can discover and make a name for, and holes, shadows, numbers, etc. would be these kinds of patterns. But it's useful then it's useful to distinguish between whether it's actualized now or not. This helps us then to make a distinction between, for instance, universalia and particularia, whereas particularia would then be these individual things that have parts that are actualized, whereas universalia are these general patterns that don't need to be actualized at a specific time or place. It also helps us to distinguish between concrete and abstract, because something concrete is an individual that can be actualized at a time and a place, whereas an abstract thing is a relation between individuals where we disregard the individuals. I gave an example earlier, I think, and we'll say much more about it when we come to mathematical entities, but it's this for instance, the number 4, which can relate for oranges or for windows, etc. But we disregard the windows and the oranges, and we just maintain or retain keep the relation 4. So that's the abstract relation. Now, I didn't mention the distinction between existence now and before, but that would be then the difference between a mammoth and a horse is that a mammoth was actualized before or previously in time, whereas horses are actualized now. So that would be the distinction between existing now and existing before, but we'll say much more about time as well when we come to the videos on time. The concept of the world can also be defined now in the wider sense. Well, it's just a fundamental field with all the values and everything that is possible. But if we want to talk about the real world as opposed to a possible world, or to talk about the history of the world, then we're talking about the actualized values, that which has been actualized in the physical and the qualia field. Moving on from types of existence to existence in general, one could think that it's impossible to define existence because it's meant to be the sort of most general concept, the deepest and most fundamental thing at all, existence. You can't reduce that to something more basic, or you can't define it in terms of something more basic or in terms of something broader. It's meant to cover everything. And so one can answer or wonder whether it's impossible to define or explain it. But it is possible to explicate or describe different features of existence and say something about its internal structure, and thus explain it partly and define it partly, even if we can't give the full explanation or definition as in the sense of reducing it to something else or explaining it in light of something else. So we can say, we can describe some common features that all existing things have, which also then describes existence in general. So everything that exists is part of the fundamental field. I'm talking now about existence in the narrow sense, not just a broad sense of something possible. In a narrow sense of something existing, we can say that everything that exists has structure. Everything that exists consists of actualized values. Everything that exists is localized. Everything that exists is registerable. It's possible to register it, and it can have causal influence. So these are then certain features of what it means to exist. It unravels this concept of existence. But we can still ask, well, what's sort of the core of the concept of existence? What if the suggested building blocks don't exist? Or what if your theory is wrong? But we just want to talk about the concept of existence. What do we mean by existence? What's the core of this concept? Well, I think when we're still talking about in this narrow sense then, it's a capacity for causal influence. That is what we mean by existence. And I've said that what creates everything actual or everything or motion, etc., is this actualizer. So the power of actualization is what gives this causal influence. And that's a bit interesting, I think, that when we try to dig deep into the laws of nature, etc., we come to the actualizer. And also when we try to dig deep into the concept of existence, we come to something similar, this actualizer or this power of actualization. And we'll return to this actualizer also later when we try to reduce all the values down to something fundamental. That's in later videos, but that's how it works in this series of videos, that we start to unravel some topics, but then we come to new topics, and they will help us see then the different topics they must be understood in light of each other, which means that as we talk about new and topics, we understand the different parts more and more. And the same will be when it comes to existence and actualization. But this was what I had to say so far in this first presentation of existence.